Hello everybody, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we are going to explore why fear keeps so many people small, even when they want a bigger and better life. Fear does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like waiting, staying quiet, choosing safety, or saying maybe later again and again. In this video, we will talk about how fear hides in everyday choices, what it quietly steals from our future, and how life begins to change when fear is no longer allowed to make every decision. If you enjoy calm and meaningful English stories, stay with me until the end. Part 1. Fear does not always look like fear. Many people think fear looks obvious. They imagine shaking hands, a fast heartbeat, or a person who is clearly nervous. But in real life, fear is often much quieter than that. Sometimes it does not look dramatic at all. Sometimes it looks like waiting too long, staying silent, choosing the safe option, or telling yourself, maybe later. That is why fear can be hard to notice. A person may say they are only being careful. They may say they need more time, more confidence, or a better moment. They may avoid a new step, not because they do not want it, but because something inside them says it is safer to stay where they are. Over time, these small choices begin to shape a whole life. This is how fear keeps people small. It does not always stop them with one big moment. More often, it works slowly. It tells them not to speak up, not to try, not to risk embarrassment, not to begin again, and not to believe too much in what they really want. It makes the smaller life feel reasonable. It makes the safer path feel wise. And after a while, the person may not even realize that fear has been making many of their decisions. That is what makes this topic so important. Fear is not always loud enough for us to recognize it immediately. Sometimes it hides inside ordinary choices and normal habits. It can look like caution, delay, or even logic. But little by little, it can keep a person from becoming who they could have been. So the real question is not only, am I afraid? The deeper question is this: how much of my life has fear already made smaller without me fully seeing it? Part 2. The small life fear builds. Fear does not always destroy life in one big moment. More often, it makes life smaller little by little. This is one of the quietest and most painful things about it. A person may still live, work, smile, and continue with normal life, but fear slowly reduces what they allow themselves to do, try, hope for, or become. This is how a small life begins. A person may stop speaking honestly because they fear rejection. They may choose a safer dream because they fear failure. They may hide their talent because they fear judgment. They may stay in the wrong place because leaving feels uncertain. None of these choices seem dramatic by themselves, but together, they begin to shape a version of life that is narrower than the one the person truly wanted. That is what fear often does. It does not always say, give up everything. Instead, it quietly says, choose less, risk less, want less. Stay where it feels safe. And because that voice sounds careful and reasonable, many people follow it without realizing how much it is shrinking their world. Over time, the person begins to adapt to this smaller life. They stop expecting too much from themselves. They stop reaching as far. They stop imagining what might be possible if they were a little braver. Fear trains them to live in a tighter space, and after a while, that space begins to feel normal. But normal does not always mean true. A smaller life may feel safer, but it often comes with a quiet sadness. Deep inside, the person may still feel that they were meant for more. And maybe that is one of the clearest signs of all. Fear does not only create protection, sometimes it creates a life that feels safe on the outside, but too small for the soul on the inside. Part 3. Fear hides inside everyday decisions. One reason fear is so powerful is that it hides inside everyday decisions. It does not always appear in big, dramatic moments. Most of the time, it lives in small choices that look normal from the outside. That is why many people do not even realize how often fear is guiding them. A person wants to apply for something, but waits one more week. They want to speak honestly, but stay quiet. They want to start a project, but tell themselves they need a better plan first. They want to leave what is wrong for them, but remain where things feel familiar. In each case, fear does not shout. It simply suggests delay. That is how fear becomes a habit. It says, not now. It says, maybe later. It says, wait until you feel more ready. And because those thoughts sound reasonable, the person listens. This is what makes fear so deceptive. If fear always looked extreme, people would notice it more easily. But when it hides inside delay, hesitation, overthinking, and safe decisions, it becomes harder to question. The person may think they are only being smart, cautious, or practical. Meanwhile, fear is slowly teaching them to avoid the very things that could change their life. That is why everyday decisions matter so much. A life does not become small only because of one big moment of fear. It often becomes small because fear is repeated in quiet choices over and over again. One avoided risk, one missed chance, one silence, one delay, then another. And after enough time, those small choices begin to build a pattern. The person may still dream of a bigger life, but their daily decisions keep leading them back to safety. That is how fear hides in plain sight, and that is why it can shape a whole future without ever needing to appear loudly. Part 4. Why fear feels so convincing. Fear feels convincing because it usually speaks in the language of protection. It does not always sound negative or dramatic. Very often, it sounds reasonable. It says, do not move too fast. Because of that, fear can feel less like a problem and more like good advice. That is why so many people trust it. Fear wants to protect us from pain, rejection, embarrassment, uncertainty, and loss. In some situations, that protection is useful. It helps us notice danger and think before acting. But fear does not always know the difference between real danger and uncomfortable growth. Sometimes it treats a new opportunity like a threat. Sometimes it makes a necessary risk feel foolish. Sometimes it turns a meaningful step into something that looks too dangerous to try. This is where fear becomes limiting. A person may believe they are being wise when they are really just being controlled by imagined outcomes. They may think they are protecting themselves, but they are also protecting themselves from confidence, experience, and change. Fear makes the unknown look larger than it is. It makes the risk look heavier than the possibility. It focuses the mind on what might go wrong and hides what might go right. That is why fear can sound so logical. And those thoughts can feel intelligent, even when they are quietly keeping a person trapped. This is what makes fear so difficult to fight. It often disguises itself as protection, when in truth, it may be limiting a life that is trying to grow. Part 5. What fear quietly steals from you. Fear does not only stop action. It also steals things quietly over time. This is one of its deepest costs. Many people think fear only takes big chances away, but in truth, it often takes much more than that. It can slowly steal confidence, time, experience, connection, and even the future a person might have built. At first, the loss may seem small. One missed opportunity. One conversation never started. One dream pushed further away. But fear rarely stops after one moment. If it keeps guiding a person's life, the losses begin to grow. The person becomes less trusting of themselves. They stop believing in their own courage. They begin to doubt what they can handle, what they can become, and what they deserve to reach for. That is why fear is not only about pain in the present. It is also about possibility in the future. A person may never know what would have happened if they had spoken, tried, left, begun, or risked more. And that uncertainty can become its own kind of sadness. Fear does not always create visible failure. Sometimes it creates invisible absence. A life not lived fully, a version of the self that never had the chance to appear. This is why the hidden cost feels so heavy. Fear may protect a person from one difficult moment, but it may also take away years of growth, joy, learning, and self-discovery. It can leave behind a life that feels smaller, not because the person lacked potential, but because fear kept asking them to choose less. The most painful thing fear often steals is not comfort. It is possibility. And once a person begins to see that clearly, they may also begin to understand why obeying fear for too long can quietly become one of the greatest losses of all. Part 6. The moment life starts changing. Life usually starts changing when fear is no longer allowed to make every decision. This does not mean fear disappears completely. In fact, many brave people still feel afraid. The difference is that they stop treating fear like the final voice. They begin to understand that fear may speak, but it does not always deserve to lead. This is an important turning point. Many people wait too long for courage to feel comfortable. They think they will act when fear becomes smaller, when confidence becomes stronger, or when the right moment finally appears. But real change often begins before any of those things happen. It begins when a person chooses one honest step, even while fear is still present. That step may look small from the outside. It may be speaking up once, applying once, saying no once, leaving once, trying again once. But these small moments matter because they begin to change the relationship between the person and their fear. Fear is no longer the one deciding everything. The person is. This is how a bigger life begins. Not in one perfect moment, but in the quiet shift from obedience to courage. A person starts asking a new question. Not, how can I avoid fear? But, what will happen if I keep letting fear decide my life? That question changes something. It makes the cost of staying small feel heavier than the discomfort of trying. And that is often where growth begins. Not when fear disappears, but when the person finally sees that staying in the same small life may hurt more than moving forward afraid. Courage does not always arrive like a powerful feeling. Sometimes it begins as a quiet refusal to remain trapped. Part 7. Fear keeps you small until you stop obeying it. Fear is human. Everyone feels it. There is nothing strange or shameful about being afraid. The real problem begins when fear becomes something we obey too often. That is when it starts to shape our life in quiet but powerful ways. It makes our choices smaller, our risks fewer, and our world narrower than it needs to be. This is why fear keeps people small. Not because they are weak, not because they have no dreams, but because fear keeps asking them to stay where things feel safe, even when that safety is slowly becoming a kind of prison. Over time, the person may still look fine from the outside, but inside, they know something important is missing. They know they are holding back. They know there is more inside them than the life they are currently living. The good news is that fear does not have to disappear before life can change. A person does not need to feel completely ready, completely sure, or completely brave. They only need to stop giving fear the final word. One honest decision can begin a different direction. One brave step can break an old pattern. One moment of courage can open a door that fear kept closed for years. So if fear has been keeping your life small, do not wait for it to vanish. Just begin to question it. Begin to notice where it speaks, where it hides, and where it keeps asking you to choose less than what your heart truly wants. Fear keeps you small until you stop obeying it. And maybe the bigger life you want does not begin when fear disappears. Maybe it begins the moment you decide that fear will no longer be the voice that leads you.